What's going on? Welcome back to the channel. Today when I talk to you about Lucid, I want to go over some expectations for this upcoming week, what might cause some volatility in the stock price, and go over everything else that you need to know. But first, make sure to hit that thumbs up, and with that, let's get right to it. So starting off with data points for this upcoming week, you have a couple big ones, but I think essentially it's not the data points themselves that will move the market, rather what it's done afterwards. And what I mean by that is, so Monday you have ISM services, on Tuesday you have exports imports. That could potentially kind of get Trump really ranting about tariffs and how it's in a massive possibly imbalance, and based on the forecast it looks as so at the end of the day, it's just potentially a lot of these could just push Trump to, again, just start one of his rants, and the market doesn't really like those. It's just a lot of uncertainty. So Tuesday, anticipate that. You also do have on Wednesday the Fed interest rate decision. It is fair to assume that there won't be any cut, but what is said afterwards by Powell, that could move the market. But similarly, like I just said, if there isn't any cut, you could have Trump go on one of his rants and potentially another let's fire Powell kind of phase, which again, the market doesn't really like. Thursday, you have the typical stuff, so initial jobless claims, and then on Friday, a lot of Fed speakers. So all of that could move the market, and then you do have a lot of big companies unveiling their earnings. So Monday you have Palantir, a lot of speculative plays, but you do have Disney, you have SoundHound, a lot of big names, but yours truly is coming out Tuesday after hours. So I'm going to be live streaming that on a side note, so make sure you guys subscribe and do all the other fun jazz. So I'll go over exactly some expectations for that. So starting off, the implied move is roughly 10%, 9.91%. So in either direction, anticipate like a 25% move, which in reality is somewhat kind of still within line for the Elliott wave technical. So I'll go over that in a second. But historically speaking, Lucid does miss on their earnings. As you can kind of see from this column, the only times the market has really gone up and seen their earnings as a beat is two times. Both conveniently were Q2. So Q2 reporting for 2024 as well as 2023 caused a 3% and then a 12% move up. And so I think this time around, history could repeat itself, but I think it's all going to come down to the actual data points. Starting off though, looking at their earnings, so negative 23 cents for the earnings per share, and then 247.54 million for the revenue. Over the last 90 days, you have two positive and two negative revisions to the earnings per share, and a little bit further of a breakdown. So that 23 cents does represent 22.05% year-over-year growth. Negative 32 is the low, negative 18 is the high. So you have kind of a lot of kind of polar opposite mentality for Lucid. And then aside from that, the revenue, that 247 does work out to be 43.3% year-over-year growth, 233 the low, 276 the high. Similarly, kind of on all over the place. But when it comes down to even their previous earnings, because they did for face value beat on earnings per share and revenue last earnings, but it still went down. Lucid's still in the stage that the market is very much all about future guidance. And so even if Lucid does miss, for instance, on their earnings per share or revenue, I feel like the market might forgive a lot of that as long as they give good future guidance, such as the Gravity. And are they still on kind of thinking their 20,000 end of year production goal is feasible? That is exactly what the market will be kind of looking at. And same goes for their new marketing that they started to incorporate in Q1. How did that turn out? Is it beneficial? Did it kind of drive up demand a little bit? That's exactly what the market is going to be really looking at. Anticipate analysts to be somewhat hostile, with the exception of a few. But even, for instance, looking at the last earnings, so the Q4, you did have roughly, was it 6-7 analysts that did join. So Chris and Andre Shepard, both very bullish. You have Adam Jonas, I feel like he's being forced to be bullish, but at the same time still a little bit bearish. You have John Murphy, very bearish. Tom, very bearish on Lucid. And so they're going to be really pounding Lucid with some pretty hard questions. So CFO can't remember his name at the top of my head, is going to have to be really on top of it. Same goes for Mark. And that being said, additional questions from retail being posed to management, I don't think much is going to come from that. So they'll typically ask or answer, I guess, the first 3/4. So first one is just about supply chain, but I feel like that is kind of an old question. So on when China did state that they're going to be stopping the export of rare earth material. So that's going to be something that hopefully Lucid will be able to easily answer. The Nikola facility, I think, is a good one, as far as if Lucid sees it as a opportunity to actually move up the midsize. So that's going to be a good question, I think, assuming Lucid's able to answer that. And then this one, what will Lucid do to compete with Tesla? I feel like that question has been asked time and time again. And sometimes Lucid flip-flops. They say that Tesla is a competitor. Sometimes they say they're not. So we'll have to wait and see. And then the rest of the questions, honestly, and this is rather disappointing. So I think the questions coming from analysts might yield the most. As far as this upcoming week, you do have Lucid at the EVs Saudi event. And so that is between May the 4th and the 6th. So that should be good. Hopefully some pretty good PR and posts on social media. Aside from that, though, official events, not really all that much. So today is the last day that they are in New Jersey. Aside from that, though, it seems to be that they're taking a kind of a 1-month break before they are in Dallas at the Electrify Expo, which, again, maybe they have some stuff planned in between there. They just haven't updated their website. That's been one of my complaints in the past, but just anticipate a lot of volatility regardless. But when it comes to shorts, so on Friday, they did return 2.81 million shares. 28.7% of the free float is being shorted. So shorts have really doubled down over the last little bit. But that does work out to be 354.42 million shares overall being shorted. So when it comes to this upcoming week, anticipate shorts to be fairly active. High end that Lucid has ever been was roughly around that 30 to 31%, I believe. So as far as shorts doubling down now, I don't really see that on the table. Again, take that with a grain of salt. They could kind of still bring it up to that 30 to 31% in my opinion, but as I've kind of mentioned in the past, it doesn't logically make sense because Lucid's done massive changes from compared to like 2023, 2022, but yet Lucid's short interest is roughly kind of the same. So in reality, even if they do double down, I feel like they're just overextending and kind of artificially suppressing Lucid below technical levels and stuff like that. So just again, anticipate a lot of manipulation coming from their end. With the open interest, so with it closing at 253 on the Friday, that does mean that you have 15,000 at that 250 in the money. So market makers will have to cover 1.5 million shares. Most likely some of these transactions being done after hours was part of that, but still you could see a nice bump up come Monday as market makers cover potentially the rest. But based on the bulls, they are under the impression that Lucid is going to get to roughly around that 3 to 350, and then the bears for it to be sub 2. So based on options, people are anticipating greater volatility than the current implied move of that 9.91. So just anticipate a very bumpy week. And even if Lucid didn't have their earnings, I feel like given all the data points and everything, it is going to be a very bumpy week regardless. So let me know your viewpoint on that in the comments below. With it at $2.53, trading between this R1 and the pivot. So 241 and then 218 is going to be the next strong kind of support levels. 264, 278, and then 301 is going to be the next strong target / resistance points. On the actual looking here, there hasn't really been all that much in changes for the key metrics, so earnings per share or revenue or anything along those lines. But Elliott Wave Technicals going into this upcoming week is rather optimistic, so it does show, based on this, for it to hit between that 284 and $3 range. That's assuming it is able to stay above that 218. So going back over here, this S1, that 218 is going to be a key point to really watch for. So let me know your viewpoint on that, and if you where you feel Lucid is going to go post earnings, or just generally where this it's going to land this week. But given everything though, it is still above the 50-day moving average, so 235, and then that 100-day moving average is 264. So it's just been kind of wedge bound between those 2 points. Both have been somewhat tested, so you did have a little bit of a test of that 100 kind of end of April, and then flip side, end of April on the 30th, you did have that test of that 50-day moving average. So their earnings most likely will be that catalyst to either break it above that or potentially below that. Another thing to keep in mind, based on the options, people are feeling that it's going to be roughly around that 3 to 350, like I said. So that 200-day moving average is sitting at 284. So let me know your thoughts on Lucid. What do you think they need to say for the market to actually think their earnings is optimistic? Like I said, I think we even recently with Apple and also Amazon, both their key metrics were on point, but they gave very bad future guidance. So at the end of the day, that's going to be the same thing that follows Lucid. So I think the market might forgive a lot of those key metrics and just focus on solely the future guidance. And Lucid better have all the data ready, for instance, how they plan on the tariffs and what type of impact is that going to be on Lucid, and do they see, for instance, that being a big deterrent for Canadians to buy Lucid vehicles. I don't think they've ever quoted, for instance, on what percentage is done by Canadians, but I feel like with now Canada imposing a tariff on, for instance, US autos, it's really a big deterrent. There's no real point in Canadians buying any Lucid product unless AMP2 is able to fulfill that. So this is where, again, they better have all their ducks in a row. They better be able to answer any question, because that's what exactly analysts are really going to pound them with, is questions about tariffs, supply chain, gravity demand, all of that. So just anticipate a lot of volatility. So let me know your thoughts on Lucid. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe. I always greatly appreciate that. One final thing, pop over to my Patreon and get buy signals on stocks, options, crypto. Definitely worthwhile to pop over there and take a look. With all that, appreciate all of you watching.